Okay. Okay, welcome everyone to this next session. Our first speaker is Samuel Ulbricht from the University of Stuttgart, and his presentation is titled "The Moral Status of Virtual Actions." So please welcome Samuel.
Okay. Excuse me. Yeah. What? Sorry for that. Okay. Great. Yeah. That's my topic, and I will talk about it's kind of an ethical perspective on virtual actions. I'm still unsure how to call them. I think I could also call them fictional actions. But yeah, in this presentation I'm talking about virtual actions, but it's quite the same. And it's still work in progress, so I'm thankful for every critical comment here. And to make clear what this presentation is about, I invite you to imagine the following scenario. A person named Peter is playing a video game in which he has the task to get an apple from the supermarket. Peter could just walk into the store and buy the apple. He could also try to sneak in and steal the apple. So we have kind of an open mission structure, maybe a little bit like GTA. Peter decides to enter the store, to torture the owner, to slaughter all adult customers and rape every child he can find. After this, he takes the apple. Mission accomplished. Now, has Peter done something morally wrong? And this is the question that I'm about to, not to solve, but to analyze. Well, apparently, there is something morally objectionable in this scenario. In particular, if you presume that Peter had no feelings of guilt or disgust while acting in the virtual world. But which aspect exactly could we examine from this scenario? Well, the video game itself could be morally wrong. The developers could be morally wrong because they developed something that has these options. Maybe Peter's psychological reaction could be morally wrong. And maybe also Peter's action itself could be morally evaluated. And I think, wouldn't we say that Peter not only was playing maybe an immoral game that never should have been developed, and that he showed maybe somehow an inappropriate reaction, but that he also acted morally wrong in some way by making this decision in this manner. And to find out more about this question, if he did something morally wrong, I think we first have to look at what kind of action we're dealing with here. What is the virtual action? And here I want to refer on a simplified model of Donald Davidson's model of a typical action, but I think that any causal theory of action works here. You don't have to fully accept Davidson for my ideas, but here's the model. This is a typical action for Davidson. There's a mental part and a physical part. The mental part is a primary reason, which is a pro-attitude, like a desire to a certain world state, and the belief that my action can reach this world state. And then there's the action as conscious body movement for Walton, and then there are the consequences. And the action and the consequences are, for Davidson, a typical action. I call them typical actions. Now, how could a virtual action look like? This is quite maybe an easy possibility, just to insert fictional consequences, and the primary reason is referring to these fictional consequences. And let's make this clear with an example. If Peter plays a game and he wants to defeat a monster, then this is the pro-attitude, defeating the monster, or the monster is defeated, and Peter thinks that pushing the buttons X and Y will cause these consequences. Then he pushes the buttons and then the monster is defeated. So this I want to call a virtual action. What about an action where out of the fictional consequences there are also real consequences, like the game is over, Peter beats the game and he wants to beat the game. Like, this is now his pro attitude, and he thinks that he can reach this world state by defeating the monster. And I would say that this is not a virtual action, it's a normal action, because his primary reason is referring to a real world consequence. Also, when he just wants to have fun or whatever, if the consequence that Peter's primary reason is referring to is a real world consequence, I would say it's action and not a virtual action, a normal action. Yeah, and this is another example for a virtual action. It's just the point that a virtual action has, with a virtual action, the pro attitude of an agent has to refer to a fictional consequence, and he must be aware of that status, that it's about a fictional consequence and a fictional world. And this is the first, or the second condition. The first condition is, of course, that a virtual action has to contain fictional consequences. And now, again, to the second condition, because this is really necessary, I think, because, for example, if someone wants to destroy humankind by releasing a huge bomb and this person pushes a button to do so, then I would say this is always about a normal action, or at least a real try from an ethical perspective, even if the whole scenario was only a computer simulation. If this person really wanted to destroy humankind, then I think we should evaluate it from like a normal action. Okay. Now, of course, when we talk about fictional consequence, we have to make clear that every fictional consequence has a physical basis. In this case, represented by binary codes, maybe translating inputs to the controller into pixels on the screen. And therefore, we must talk about representations of fictional actions in the context of causal impacts, but it would be inappropriate to reduce fictional consequences to their physical substance, because all the aesthetic, narrative, psychological, and, as we will see, moral facets of video gaming would be lost. Okay, now we know somehow what a virtual action is, but what's the moral status of these virtual actions? And I want to start with two observations from the previous. Virtual actions are closely related to their fictional consequences, and so they're insufficiently described by a purely physical depiction. In the example from the beginning, Peter is not only pushing buttons and changing pixels, there's more in this activity. And another observation is that from an ethical point of view, virtual actions seem to have another moral state than equivalent actions would have in reality. I think this is obvious. It's not that immoral or fictionally raping children is not that immoral like raping children in the real world. But which kind of moral status does Peter's virtual action contain? Well, let's switch to the theory of Walton again, but I just use a part of his theory to illustrate one important aspect of my ideas. You don't have to fully accept Walton's theory. But he has an example about Charles, who is watching a creepy movie featuring a terrible monster. This monster aims for Charles, and Charles is terrified, but Charles never flees his flat nor calls the police, but he watches the movie until the end. And yeah, you're familiar with Walton's theory of make-believe. He says that when we interact with fictions, we somehow move into the fiction and act as if the fiction was true. And therefore, he says, every felt emotion in a game of make-believe is merely a quasi-emotion. So Charles is not really, but only quasi-terrified. But what are quasi-emotions exactly? And this is a little bit my interpretation of Walton. Quasi-emotions have a physical or psychological base, just like normal emotions. What do I mean with that? Well, of course, also when I have a quasi-emotion, then also there are synapses in my brain that get activated, like when I have a normal emotion. But quasi-emotions relate to fictions, and those affected are aware of this. If not, Charles would be really terrified of the monster and he would flee the flat, right? Hence, quasi-emotions are different from normal emotions, even if they share the same physical base. That is, even if the activated synapses in the brain are the same. I don't know, I'm not from the biology or psychology, but even if this is the case, then it's another kind of emotion, because in the one hand we have this fictional aspect. So when we interact with fictions, we play a game of make-believe and act as if the fiction was true. Okay. So we could say that all executed actions in fictions are a type of make-believe, and therefore we can call virtual actions quasi-actions. What are quasi-actions? Well, they have a causal structure and a physical base like normal actions. We had this in the chapter before. But quasi-actions occur within fictions, and the agent is aware of that. Therefore, a quasi-action is somehow different from a normal action, even if they share the same physical base. Now, another important difference between the introduced form of actions, so the normal actions and the quasi-actions, lies in our moral treatment. Quasi-actions are a type of make-believe, and therefore, I think, must be treated morally different than normal actions. So it seems consequential to introduce a new and different types of ethics, which I want to call quasi-ethics. Now, what are quasi-ethics exactly? Well, they include a normative power comparable to normal or traditional ethics. That means they tell us what we should do and what we should not do. But quasi-ethics refer to actions as make-believe, that is, to actions on a fictional level. So quasi-ethics are different from traditional ethics, even if they share the same normative function. Yeah, let's make this clear with examples. But first, another observations. First, traditional ethics are unable to evaluate the moral content of virtual actions properly, because virtual actions or quasi-actions are a form of make-believe and therefore not a normal action. Nevertheless, I think that traditional ethics are capable of morally classifying actions that contain fictional consequences, as long as the agent's intention refers to the real world. Let's make an example, or let's watch again to the example of Peter, who's raping children in this game. We could describe this action with the following terms. Peter wanted to beat the game, he wanted to enjoy the game, check out the gameplay mechanics. These are possible explanations for his action, and these are real or normal actions, and they raise real or normal ethical questions, like, is it morally decent to enjoy creating fictional depictions of immoral cruelty or so? I'm not claiming that it is easy to evaluate these actions, but it's a question for traditional ethics. Quasi-ethics only evaluate quasi-actions. And quasi-ethics concern fictional consequences, which again depend on the agent's primary reason. Therefore, the moral content of quasi-actions is closely linked to the agent's primary reason. And this is now my first attempt for a suitable rule here that maybe we can do for quasi-ethics. As soon as the primary reason, referring to a fictional consequence, of an agent is immoral, the performed virtual action is quasi-immoral. Let's make this clear with an example. I think most of you know GTA, and there is this kind of, you can hunt stars there by murdering dozens of cops, and the more stars you have, the more, this raises the challenge, yeah, and but in the end it's just murdering dozens of cops. Let's make this the first scenario. The second scenario I want to show you in a short video, and it's, yeah, I think I have to warn you because it's really, it's not nice. It's with sexual violence. It's still GTA, but if you don't want to see it, then maybe you close your eyes or something. Oh, the sound? Yeah, I think I got it. Oh, the microphone was off all the time. Okay.
We can't see anything.
No!
Well, we can, but it's not very disturbing.
Is that really GTA?
Okay. Oh, wait. May I?
Yes.
Maybe it's.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, yeah, great. No. This was too long.
Oh, sorry. But at least it's already on.
But thank you, yes. Okay.
Hey, gorgeous, jump in.
Yeah, I think you all know that this is a possible way to play GTA. And this is a video out of YouTube. It's not me who plays this.
Yeah, I want
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, yeah, this is the second scenario where you all saw what happened. And now let's compare these two scenarios. In both cases, there's a brutal representation that refers to reality because the pixels look like human beings, but yeah. In both cases, it's an immoral action within the fictional world because in both cases, the police would come to arrest the player. But I would say that in the first case, in the star hunting case, the primary reason more likely refers to a real consequence, and in the second case, the primary reason more likely refers to a fictional consequence. Why so? Well, these are explanations, possible explanations for the first actions for murdering dozens of cops. The first one is like a fictional primary reason. He wanted just to follow a detailed plan and wanted to fictionally murder dozens of cops. But I think that the fourth explanation is is more likely because I also hunted stars and this was my primary reason. And I don't say that one is impossible, but I think 4 is more likely, and let's just assume for my example that this is the primary reason for murdering dozens of cops. And the second scenario also has several possibilities for describing it. And here I think the first primary reason is more likely than the others because it was kind of really a fictional plan, and I know here maybe there's opposition, but for me it's enough that 1 is thinkable as a primary reason, and this is enough for me here. So if we assume that the primary reason here was like referring to a fictional consequence, then we can say that in the first case the fictional consequence serves as a mean to an end to be challenged, and in the second case the fictional consequence were an end to itself. And so we could say that the first case is a normal action, so traditional ethics have to say if this is immoral or amoral, I don't know. this is not my question, but we can say that the second case is definitely quasi-moral. Now, there's of course one big unsolved question here. Where does the normative wrongness of quasi-moral quasi-actions lie exactly? Well, I said it's still work in progress, sorry. We can also formulate the question, so in which way are you doing something morally wrong when you act as if you are doing something morally wrong? And this is the question I'm thinking about at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for questions. Yes?
Yeah, I just a little bit comment about this. I think the way that you still, finding out where to draw the normative lines between what is considered wrong and what is considered not wrong. So why don't you just, let's not worry, but I think it would be good if you try to draw, like in a real world action about what is considered wrong and what is considered okay, and how do we imply that in within the space of video games? Thinking about that.
Well, if I would look at the real world immoral actions, then every killing in video games would be immoral. And I think that even Mario would be immoral because I jump on the head on living creatures, and I don't want to say that. So it's you can't just take traditional ethics or moral situations from the real world and transfer it to video games, because then we shouldn't play any video game except of, I don't know, Farmville or something.
Yeah, Anita.
In your examples, you mainly focus on the consequences of actions in real reality and with virtual circumstances, and but you sometimes mention the motivation. So I wonder, why do you skip talking about the intention or motivation with an act, with regard to trying to delimit these actions you are presenting, and what might be the delimiting line between the virtual and the real with regard to morals? I was just missing that part.
I think I think I know what you mean, but I don't skip the intention. In my words, I used the primary reason for attention after Davidson,
right.
And it's true. It was too short here, but the fictional consequence refers, or otherwise, the primary reason. If I want to act, then I have a primary reason, and this refers to a fictional consequence. And it's more about the primary reason here in my example. It's about how do we describe the reason for Peter acting like this or acting like this. And now we have here an action with this consequence, and we see this consequence, and now we try to describe this in the right manner. And when we try to describe this, we try to find a suitable reason for this action. And so this is where the intention comes in, because actually it's all about the intention. If the intention refers to the real world consequence, then I say it's a normal action. If to a fictional consequence, then a quasi-action. And so the morality of the action is at the basis the question about, is it a real intention or a quasi-intention or something?
Yes, in the back.
Should I drop the microphone?
Yes, please, do some acrobatics.
I'm not sure if the question is applicable, but what if you can't separate those two aspects as cleanly? What if an action that relates to fiction as an in itself and to, let us say, a challenge? What is if those are inseparable? A pacifist postal run or a very violent postal run, I think, don't lend themselves very well to this separation. What happens then?
Yeah, well, this is yeah, I never said that it's easy to find out if it's like if the intention refers to a real world consequence or to a fictional consequence. I mean, if we believe Davidson, there's always one primary reason that is the cause of the action. If we believe him, then it should be really clear if this cause of the action refers to a fictional consequence or to a real world consequence. But of course, I see the point that you could maybe say, yeah, this isn't clear. Maybe there are some mixtures. Yeah, I have to think about that.
Yes.
Hello. Have you read The Gamer's Dilemma?
Yes. Which one? the report. Yeah, but yeah, I know it.
Where do you put yourself in regards to that?
Well, it's neither side exactly, because I say I think there are cases where virtual. I think if we imagine that Peter is in this scenario from the beginning, he's raping his children, and so yeah. I think if his primary reason was to write a reflecting article about it for a journal of philosophy, then I would say it's not an immoral action or not a quasi-moral action, what he has done, because it's not quasi-moral because the intention refers to a real world, and it's not immoral because I want to write a reflecting article about something. Well, this is maybe a traditional ethical question, but I will take neither of the two sides there are. I think you can, because I wouldn't say that all scenarios where a player rapes a child in a video game is wrong, and I wouldn't say that all scenarios where a player murders someone is not wrong. I think there are also cases of murdering in video games that are morally wrong. So.
Yeah, but I mean, he doesn't distinguish right or wrong. He has
in the game
points at the paradox of often we think that one of them is more okay than the other.
Yeah. But I think it's, yeah, maybe we think that. But if we analyze situations, the gamer's dilemma claims that there is a reason, or that there is a moral reason for that virtual pedophilia is wrong and virtual murders are okay. And I think
no.
Yes, I think so.
No, most of the people think that virtual violence is okay, while still thinking that virtual pedophilia is wrong.
Yes. Okay.
But so, there's a difference in.
Yeah. Okay. I would say that mostly in killing people in video games, I think that the player often has not the intention to kill people, but, for example, in GTA, to challenge himself. So I think this is the reason why many people think, okay, this isn't morally wrong, but I think that it's harder to imagine a case where someone rapes a child in a video game and he does not so, but that his intention wasn't somehow related to exactly this fictional consequence. And I think it's possible, but it's harder to imagine. I think that's the case why so many people think that this is worse.
Isn't that just the case because we don't play those kinds of games, so they don't exist?
Yeah, I think this is also a reason, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. I think we need to move on. Thank you, Samuel.